Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Smith, the Yarny Bookkeeper, and we will be starting shortly at the top of the hour. I'll give everybody a couple of minutes here. Okay, it's the top of the hour, and I just want to welcome you to So You Want to Start a Handmade Business 10 Things Every Handmade Business Owner Should Know. I'm Nancy Smith, otherwise known as the Yarny Bookkeeper. And I just want to give you a brief introduction because I know most of you don't know me. Um, I also own a handmade business called Fanciful Things LLC, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. I'm a number cruncher or a bookkeeper, as well as a handmade business owner. I get the exact same feeling of joy when working with yarn and creating detailed amigurumi as I do when working with a column of numbers that are all neatly aligned and add up correctly. So, yeah, I know that's a little sick, but hey, that's the way it is. So, here's a little bit about me. First, I want to confess that I'm a yarn addict. I've also been a small business owner for over 30 years. Currently, my husband and I design, write, sell, and support software add on programs for QuickBooks for the construction industry. I've been a professional bookkeeper since the mid 1980s. I have an associate's degree in accounting. As a QuickBooks trainer, I've taught thousands of business owners how to successfully set up their accounting systems and do their books. I'm also a yarnpreneur or handmade business owner who's planning her retirement and a yarn related business. But I'm not a CPA, so I won't be providing any tax advice. And no, I won't do your books for you. What I will do is provide you with a general overview of how important it is to set up processes that will allow you to perform the necessary bookkeeping and other behind the scenes tasks that are involved in running a handmade business. So, congratulations. And before we start diving into a high level overview of what this course is all about, I'd like to say I'm really thrilled that all of you guys are here today. Your love of fiber and handcrafts is about to take you on an exciting and challenging journey as you move from a hobby to a real live handmade business owner. So, how many of you here today are actually have a handmade business? And how many of you are thinking about starting your own handmade business? Please take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat feature of the webinar. Now, that's over on the right hand side, and you'll see that I put in a link to my website where you can download the slides for this webinar and take notes. So cool. Some of you already have a handmade business. Well, to just let you know, it's absolutely never too late to start putting things together and in place. Many of us feel like, we're running our business by the seat of our pants. And I'll be honest with you, as a business owner, you're going to have a lot of days where you feel exactly that way. Um, so we have my sister-in-law, Janice, who's on the YouTube page. She's going to kind of field questions, provide any tech feedback. Thanks, sweetie, for joining me here this afternoon. We also have Sarah Dawn, and she's a knitwear and pattern designer. So welcome. I know we have some more folks that are anticipating to show up. I want to apologize for last week. Seems like the tech gods were against me from the get-go. Today, logged right in, everything ran smooth. Oh boy, yay. Um, Tech is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we all face in our business. And even though in my full-time job I deal with tech all the time, it still gets me. So, as with most webinars, you're attending in listen only mode. Questions and comments can be entered in the chat window on the right side of your screen. And really, this webinar is best viewed on a computer rather than your phone or tablet. So if things don't look quite right, please log out and then log back in using your computer. So let's get started. We've got a lot of ground to cover in this hour and still leave about 30 minutes for a Q&A. So here's an outline of the things we're going to talk about today. Um, we're basically going to start off with 8 things that no one has told you about when you start a handmade business. Then we're going to move on to how the IRS views yarn related or handmade businesses. Um, things you have to track to prove you are a professional, legitimate business. We're going to talk about setting up your business, the planning stage. Then we're going to talk about business structures, federal, state, local business licenses, taxes, permits. Then we're going to move on to bookkeeping and accounting. Then we'll talk about whether, bookkeeping software or Excel, Google spreadsheets are the way to go. Again, we'll go back and we'll delve into what information you need to track, and we'll talk about some of the bookkeeping transactions you need to make it to record them. Then we'll talk about some main business reports, what they are and why they're important. And lastly, we're going to talk about finding a good tax professional. Now, today's video, I'm going to give you a really high level overview of a 10-part course that I'll be offering this fall. And this fall, each of these bullet point items is going to be a 1-hour webinar. So this is 1 hour each webinar, 10 webinars over the course of 10 weeks. I'm tentatively starting to schedule it to start on September the 12th, which is a Wednesday, and then run each Wednesday right up until the 14th of November. So that's a little after the kids go back to school and a little bit of time before Thanksgiving. So I will send you more information via email about that course. And with that, let's get started. So, thing number 1, starting and running a business is a lot of work. I've had my own business since roughly the mid 80s. And I just want to warn you that starting and running a business, no matter what kind of business it is a lot of work. When you tell people that you have your own business, they're usually really envious and think, oh my God, that's wonderful. How great. But the reality is twofold. Yes, it's wonderful, but it also means a lot of effort and dedication on your part, especially if you work from home. You're going to have to be extremely focused. And to this day, my family thinks that just because the office for our software business is located here at home, even though it's a separate building and it really is its own identity, they think I don't work because I'm home. They also think that my yarn related business, Fanciful Things, isn't work because, well, according to them, I enjoy playing with yarn. Can any of you identify with that? I'm betting that most of you can. It's really a pain. So, let's start off with 8 things that nobody has told you about starting a business. First, you're going to say hello to an 80-hour or more work week. Now, many small business owners, especially people like myself who are looking to leave the 9-to-5 world and start our own business, um, they think, that traditional 9-to-5 stuff is going to be a thing of the past. Well, let me tell you, work hours rarely get better. And starting a small business off the ground is hard work. And the first few years are going to require a lot of effort and many extra hours on your part. But remember, the payoff will be worth it. Now, we started our software business 18 years ago, next month. And, you know, now, granted, a software business is far different than a handmade business. But it was right up until about 3, 4 years ago, I was working well over 80 hours a week. Okay, just in that full time business. And then it was like, I just said, someday I'm going to want to retire. What am I going to do with myself? So in came fanciful things. So the next thing is you need to be prepared for a roller coaster of emotions from that very first sale or the first positive or negative customer review to all the milestones along the way. The world of a small business owner is not only exhilarating, but the highs are high and the lows are also very real. You have to keep a perspective and understand the end game. Be prepared for the lows by always celebrating the wins, even if it's a little one. Like, you know, you put a blog post up today, or, you finally finished that pattern and, it's now up on Etsy, or it's up on Ravelry. Celebrate the little things because when when the lows hit, man, sometimes you just want to say, that's it, I can't do this. 3, it's lonely. Okay. Starting a new business can be a lonely ride, but it really doesn't have to be. Over time, your business will grow, and hopefully, you'll be able to surround yourself with either amazing employees as well as amazing colleagues. However, at the very beginning, starting your own business can be really isolating. There's no team lunches or chats by the water cooler with your coworkers. You'll need to work harder to make daily connections, but you can make sure that those connections count. Now, yes, technology is wonderful. We now have access to Facebook groups, and we can chat in real time through Zoom or through Google Hangouts. But the reality of it is, we're sitting home alone. Okay. We don't have that luxury of turning around to somebody and saying, hey, I need to ask you about blah, 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 and getting an immediate response. That just doesn't happen anymore. 4, other handmade business owners will become your closest friends. Okay. And this is true. This is what these Facebook groups are all about. These are all people who are walking a very similar road to you. Everybody wants to start their handmade business. Um, you know, it, and these people that you meet online, maybe you've never seen them face to face. Maybe you wouldn't recognize them on a street corner. Those people are going to become amazing friends. And they're going to, you all can learn how to support one another. And I'll tell you, your friends and family probably won't completely understand your struggles. I know my husband doesn't, but other handmade business owners, we're all going through the same stuff. Maybe not all at the same point, but we've either, pardon the cliche, been there, done that, or it's on the road coming up. So we'll always be able to have input and help you along. 5, man, you're going to wear many, and I mean many hats. When you stop and think of a traditional company, the owner of that company is the one who's responsible for the overall health and well-being of the business. Daily tasks that revolve around the big picture idea and all the long-term strategies, well, that business owner may be the brains, but they usually have somebody who is going to actually be the brawn and carry that out. As a small business owner or a micro business owner, which is what we are, we're going to be doing absolutely everything, right down to the most mundane of tasks. You'll be the president, the CEO, the owner, maybe HR manager when and if you ever hire employees. You're going to be the marketing manager, social media manager, website developer, bookkeeper, and yes, you're even going to be the receptionist. Six, remember, you absolutely cannot do it all. All right. Eventually, and I'm sure none of us are at that stage yet where we even want to think about it, or we do think about it in a vague way of, oh, gee, I wish I had somebody who could help me do this. I wish I had an employee. Um, it, you know, at some point, you're going to have to either outsource specific tasks or maybe bring on an employee to help with that workload. It may not be ideal financially, but keep in mind that your time is extremely, extremely valuable, and getting someone else to do everyday tasks that aren't your strength may be the best option for your business. So I'm not saying run right out now and hire an employee, but make it one of your goals to have somebody who will take maybe the website piece or the marketing piece or the social media piece off your plate so that you can go back and do what you do best, which is make things, no matter what those things are. So seven, you need to realize right up front that to-do list is never going to end. And that's okay. The sooner you come to terms with that, the better off you're going to be. Don't let your work hours be dictated by the amount of work that you have, because no matter what, the amount of work will always exceed the hours in a day. Instead, learn to prioritize and understand when it's time to take a well needed and much deserved break. So, number 8 is you need to back yourself always. One of the most important qualities of a successful business owner is believing in yourself, your product, and your business. The challenging startup years will require you to have unwavering faith in your decision to step out on your own. So these are the things that you probably won't hear other people say in other webinars about starting a handmade business. And that's because these 8 things right here are the, well, non-glamorous aspects of owning your own business. Now, unfortunately, and this is not to discourage anybody, this is simply a statement and a fact, and it came from a book called E-Myth Revisited. Really excellent read. I would really suggest go grab it at the local library, buy it on Amazon, whatever. But unfortunately, 90% of small businesses fail within 5 years because the business owner simply gets tired. Okay. Now, again, that's not something that other people will tell you in webinars. And you're going to find that, well, I'm pretty blunt and I'm also pretty much a straight shooter. And I will tell you about the unglamorous things in running a business. So let's move on to things to do and think about before starting a business. And even if you have your own business, these are still things that you need to stop and think about. All of these things really are ongoing to one point or another. The items that are in that kind of rose-colored text that are bolded, those are the things that I'm going to focus on. The other stuff, well, you can find other handmade business webinars that will talk about those. Because let's face it, we just don't get up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to start a business today. and dive in head first. Well, you really could, but that's not really the right way to do it. And, we kind of see that in some of the groups that we belong to. So this list right here, it was right off the top of my head when I first started thinking about doing this webinar. And they're also based on my own experience. Um, so let's keep diving right in. Now, I, this all of the things in this webinar really kind of pertain to businesses in the US, especially this section. Um, thing number 2, how the IRS views your handmade business. Well, the IRS views knitting, crocheting as hobbies. Now, really, this applies to any type of handcraft business, whether you make jewelry, make quilts, do custom sewing projects, dyeing yarn, writing patterns. All of this stuff is considered a hobby. And from here on out, instead of just saying knitting or crocheting, I'm just going to say handmade business. But please be aware that I mean any type of handmade business. So, first, you have to prove to the IRS that your handmade business is something that you started in order to make money or a profit from. So, the IRS thinks of handmade businesses as a hobby, okay? And they treat it as a hobby because they feel that you do it mainly for relaxation. You make things that you like. Maybe you give finished items as gifts or perhaps donate them to charity. If you sell your finished goods, you sell them pretty much for the cost of yarn and materials plus a couple bucks for yourself. Maybe you do, a few craft fairs or a flea market every year just to get rid of the stuff that you've made. So when you start your business and you want to be a professional, your number one goal is to make money from this business. Okay. Or a profit is how the IRS terms it. Your business is going to have its own identity. You're going to register your business with all the proper government agencies. You can have and claim expenses other than just yarn and materials. So, let's say you got credit card fees, you have website fees, you do advertising, you maybe buy a theme for your website. Okay, you're going to have business expenses, and they're going to be more than just yarn and materials. You also are going to do market research on current trends and find out what's popular and make your items based on those findings. Not to say that you're going to give up making things that you like, but you're going to be more retail focused, and that's going to involve that market research and making things that are currently popular. And then the big one, you can provide documentation proving the time and effort that you put into running a business. So, you really do have to decide if you're a hobbyist or a real business. And you must be aware that the IRS will treat the money you make differently for income tax reporting purposes, depending on your choice. I also want to say the minute you decide you're going to open an Etsy shop or a Facebook shop or a Ravelry store, etc., you are a business and you need to act accordingly. So, thing number 3, the things you have to track to prove you're a professional business. When you run a small business, to say that you have to track everything is almost an understatement, but in reality, it's the truth. So here's a list of things that you do need to keep track of: how much money you have in the bank, things you've paid for using a debit or a credit card, money you are owed by customers, even if it's for a few hours, okay? Money that you owe others, all the money you've spent, especially cash out of your own pocket, all the money you've received from selling your handmade items and affiliate income, your inventory and the materials you've purchased and keep on hand, the materials you've used and how much they cost for each item you make. This is also known in accounting terms as cost of goods sold. Your overhead expenses, and we'll talk more about those a little bit later. Taxes you owe or are going to owe. And most importantly, your time. Keeping track of these things helps to prove that you are a professional business and provides documentation that you can give your tax preparer when it's time to file your yearly income tax return. Now, even as a hobbyist, you've always needed to keep track of, at the very least, money you've received, money you've spent, and the cost of the materials you've used. So, thing number 4, setting up your business, the planning stage. Well, the first step of the planning stage involves you, your business, and what you want your business to be. So you're going to start with, choosing a business name and a tagline. You're going to want to make it easy to spell, pronounce, and remember. Make sure it conveys what your business is about and avoid a name that's limiting. For examples, Nancy's Crocheted Unicorns is limiting because people will think that you only sell crocheted unicorns, where in reality, you might sell, you know, a whole bunch of other things, including hats and scarves and shawls and, you know, cute little teddy bear amigurumi or, anything along that line. So think big picture. You're also going to want to create a business plan. Yeah, I know. Most people hear business plan and they want to run for the hills. But a business plan is basically a written roadmap that you make for yourself and your business. And it's all and it's something we should all do as part of our planning and goal setting processes. And not only that, you're going to want to review that business plan every once in a while and make sure, that you're really on the right track of from where you started. Excuse me. Sorry. So thing number 5, actually setting up your business. Well, here we go. You know, you you're going to sorry, I just lost my whole train of thought. Once the planning stage is behind you, believe it or not, there's still more planning and research to do before you actually start setting up your business. This is where you'll start having to deal with the government, and boy, can it be confusing. But do your homework on these important items before you actually start doing the paperwork. Now, these items include something very basic and very simple is make sure that where you live is zoned for operating a handmade business from your house. Okay. Um, Even if you never have people physically coming to your house to look at the items that you make, you need to make sure that local zoning is going to cover it. Next, you'll want to choose a legal structure for your business. And here in the US, there are several to choose from. You can be a sole proprietor, you could be a partnership, an S corporation, a C corporation, and even in some states, you can be an LLC. Um, and depending on which legal structure you choose, it will have an impact on how much how you pay your taxes and the amount of paperwork your business is required to do. You'll also need to choose a principal business activity. Now, when you start doing the paperwork to set up your business, you'll be required to choose a principal activity or a professional activity code, also known as NAICS, which stands for North American Industry Classification System. Now, just like it sounds, the government, the big they, want you to classify the type of business that you have. Okay. And then there's all the lovely federal, state, and local business licenses, permits, and taxes. Get a federal EIN or employer identification number. Some states are going to require it for you to even open a bank account. And in reality, it's much safer than using your social security number, and it's free. You're going to want to register your business with your state. Find the Secretary of State's website for your state or your state Department of Taxes website. Do a search for starting a business, and you'll find lots of information about what you need to do. Now, some things like registering your business with the Secretary of State will cost you a fee, while setting up a sales tax account is free. So be prepared, do your homework, get all of those numbers together, know how much you need to have to start your business before you start doing the paperwork. Okay, speaking of sales tax, well, as of Thursday, the 21st of June, everything that I was going to say became pretty much null and void with the exception of one thing. You are going to need to understand your responsibility for charging, collecting, and remitting sales tax. And on Thursday, the Supreme Court made a decision that each state can collect sales tax even from out of state businesses. So if here I am in Vermont and I make a sale to Janice in Ohio, Ohio can say that I have to charge Ohio sales tax to Janice. I have to collect it and then I have to remit it to them. Now, I know there's a lot of hullabaloo about sales tax going on. All I'm going to say is at this point, the only thing that is for certain is the states can collect sales tax from businesses outside of their own state. The reality is there's nothing that's been released yet. Like there's no fine details. So, and then according to some of the things I've read, you know, in essence, the Supreme Court said yes, states can collect, but they're now shoving it down to Congress and ultimately each individual state to decide what the heck they're going to do. So there's going to be a lot of changes in the next, several months. Some people are, I read a couple articles that said, oh, yeah, the states can start doing this as of July 1. I don't think that any state government is that on the ball that in a little over a week they're going to be ready to have everything spelled out for businesses outside of their state. So that's kind of all I'm going to say about sales tax for right now. I am going to stay on top of this, and there's going to be some posts on my blog and in the next few weeks as to what's going on. So you're also going to want to talk to your insurance agent. Do you need general liability or professional liability insurance to protect you if someone is hurt on the premises? If you actually have a physical little shop on your property that people can come and view your handmade items? Do you need product liability insurance? Say you do a craft fair. Do you need liability insurance for being at that craft fair? Do you need increased homeowners or property insurance, or maybe even home based business insurance? So make sure you talk to your insurance agent about your business and be very upfront with them. You're also going to find that once you start doing this, you're going to feel like you're talking to people who speak a foreign language. And that some of that foreign language is just the language of business. And if they say something that you don't understand, make them explain it to you until you do understand it. Um, you're going, as a business owner, one of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to learn that business language. And unfortunately, they're really not going to be interested in learning ours. They're not going to have any interest in at all in knowing what SSK means. Okay. Um, so other things to take into consideration. How are you going to pay your federal income taxes on the money you make from your business? Good question, huh? Self employment tax includes 12.4% for Social Security and 2.9% for Medicare. Think of when you had that 9 to 5 job, there was Social Security and Medicare that came out of your paycheck. Well, now as a business owner, you're still responsible for that. Okay. Plus, there's federal and state withholding, and that's going to depend on your overall tax bracket. So, talk with whoever did your 2017 tax return to determine what your overall federal and state bracket is. And right at the moment, because of new laws that went into effect in January, that bracket could be anywhere from 10 to 39.60% at the federal level. And of course, each state is different. If you decide on a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC, keeping track of owner draws, okay, that's money you take out of your business, is as important as keeping track of owner investments, which is money you put into your business out of your own pocket. So when you take money out of your business, you need to record it as part of your bookkeeping tasks. Write yourself a check from your business account and then deposit it into your personal account. Same is true on the flip side. When you take money out of your personal account or take cash out of savings or whatever to put into your business, you want to make sure you're tracking all that. And then, of course, there's special considerations. There are special laws that cover finished handmade items. Do you make and sell toys? If so, you need to know about the toy safety standards requirements. They need to be child safe and labeled appropriately, for example, like maybe not suitable for children under 3, small parts, etc. And really, there's a whole lot more to that. So if you make handmade children's toys, go and look up that Toy Safety Requirements Act. Okay. Do all of your research first before you actually start filling out the necessary paperwork. Thing number 6, bookkeeping and accounting terms and what they mean. So, when we enter the world of business ownership, we all have to learn a new language. I call it accounting speak. These are the terms that will be used by CPAs and business advisors, and we'll have to learn their language in order to effectively communicate with them. So, accounting speak. They're going to talk about chart of accounts or general ledger accounts. Bookkeepers, accountants, CPAs, tax preparers you use, they all segregate our information into what they call a chart of accounts. Now, this information is arranged into groups, and these groups are called assets, liabilities, equity, cost of goods sold, income, expenses, other income, and other expenses. Yeah, that's a whole mouthful. So let me kind of like break it down for you. Assets. These are the things that your business owns that have value. Okay. It's money in your checking account, it's inventory, it's major equipment purchases, you know, anything that your business owns that has a value. Liabilities, well, that's the flip side. That is all the money that you owe to others. Equity, in a nutshell, is what your business is worth. But it's a tricky devil because in accounting, there is this wacky formula that says assets, things you own, minus liabilities, money you owe, equals equity. But even then, it's not that straightforward because it also takes into consideration owner investments, owner draws before you get to that bottom line health of your business. Income. You're probably thinking, whew, there's a term I finally understand. Yep, that's the money you charge and receive from selling your finished items or services. Cost of goods sold, this is these are the actual costs of materials that go into making your finished goods. And yes, this is everything you make is going to have a different cost of goods sold. So if you dye yarn, one type of yarn is more expensive than another for you to buy. Maybe a particular dye color is more expensive than another. So even if you just sit there and say, oh, well, I dye yarn. Okay. It's not going to be that simple because each skein or batch of a particular yarn in a particular colorway is going to have a different cost than a, another. For example, the difference in cost or price between worsted weight and fingering weight. It's going to cost you different amounts to make or dye each one of those. So you're going to need to get really good about tracking all of those costs. Then, of course, we have expenses or overhead. Now, these are the costs that you are going to incur to keep your business running, even if you aren't making any money. Think website hosting. Okay. Website hosting is anywhere from $3 to $10 a month. That's overhead. You're going to be paying that $3 or $10 a month every month, whether or not you have sales in that month. So that's kind of that is considered an overhead item. Craft fair fees, that's another overhead item. You may pay in February for booth space for a craft show that's not until November. Okay. So you track. Okay. Every penny you spend. Now, other income, if you have a website and you've joined an affiliate program like Share a Sale or um, what's Google calling it these days, where you put Google ads on and, every time somebody clicks, you have the potential to make a commission. That is other income because that's money you receive that has nothing to do with the sale of your finished items. Other expenses, well, this is usually reserved for expenses that are determined by your CPA that really don't have anything to do with the day-to-day operation of your business. An example of an other expense is, say, the loss on the sale of an asset. So let's say, you spent $2,000 on this really swanky sewing machine that did everything. and you had it for 6 or 8 months, and you decided you absolutely hated the thing, so you turned around and you sold it for $1,000. Okay, that is a loss because you're selling it for less than what you paid for it. And you'll go to your CPA at the end of the year and you'll say, hey, in February I bought this swanky sewing machine. This is what I paid for it. 6 months later, I turned around and I sold it for this amount because I absolutely hated the thing. So at the end of the year, when it comes time to do your taxes, your CPA is going to come up with that other expense, which would be the loss on the sale of an asset. Another term that they're going to talk about is general ledger. And CPAs love this word, okay? And I don't know why, because it's such an old school term. But back in the old days, a general ledger was nothing more than a huge notebook that contained pages and pages and pages to hold all the transactions for each specific account. So think about, you have a website hosting expense. Okay. In paper terms, you would have a piece of paper for that had everything to do with website hosting expense. And in there would be 12 entries for that monthly website hosting fee. That page is a general ledger. Okay. Um, if you use spreadsheets, well, again, we're going to go with that concept of, you're going to have one master workbook, and within that workbook, you're going to have all of these different tabs, and each tab is going to be a general ledger for a specific account. So in there, you would have that same tab for website hosting expenses, and then you'd have your 12 entries on that worksheet for website hosting, January, February, blah, 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 right up through December. Now, computer software is going to make it so much easier because it provides you the ability to simply click a button, and then it's going to give you a report based on all the data that you've entered into it. They're also going to talk about a balance sheet report. Now, the balance sheet is going to show you the information about your assets, liabilities, equity, and that's going to give you the overall net worth of your business. Now, if you go for a loan for your business, a bank is going to want to see a balance sheet. Okay. Another one is profit and loss or an income statement. Same thing, two different terms, depending on who you talk to. The profit and loss or income statement is going to show your income, your cost of goods sold, and expenses for a specific period of time, whether it's a month, a quarter, or a year. So these are some of the things that you have to learn about. And trust me, there are going to be many, many more terms that you'll run into. But these are the most common ones. And like I said, CPAs are notorious for this. I worked with a CPA, from December right up until March. And I was helping a client, and the CPA called the client's bookkeeper and said to her, I need general ledgers for this account, this account, this account, this account, and this account. And the poor girl, she called me up and she said to me, she said, what the hell's a general ledger? And she uses QuickBooks. And I said, oh, she just wants a QuickBooks quick report on those accounts. And the poor gal was like, well, why didn't he just say so? And it's like, that's not the way CPAs work. They are going to use their terms, and you have to learn how to conform. Okay. So, thing number 7, While we're on the subject of bookkeeping, do we want to use bookkeeping software or do we want to use Excel or Google Sheets? So, if you own a business, bookkeeping is a necessary evil. No ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. Um, it, because we have to keep track of 9 very important things: money in our business checking. And by keeping track, I don't mean just logging into your bank account online to see what the balance is. You should be keeping a check register, recording deposits and checks and what they were for. You need to keep track of your inventory, what you're buying, the value, and what you're using. Okay. And that using part becomes part of your cost of goods sold. Your assets, these are going to be the big ticket items that we purchase. Now, a little aside about assets. Each business, and talk with a CPA about this, each business is going to have a threshold. Okay. Um, and that threshold is going to determine whether or not something is an expense that gets recognized on your P&L, or if something is an asset and goes on your balance sheet. Now, most businesses, um, our own software business, anything, if we go and buy a computer and we pay $499 for it, we expense it. But if we go and buy a computer and we pay $1,500 or $1,800 for it, that computer becomes an asset. So sometimes those big ticket items that we purchase, you have to make a decision, and that decision stems from that, that cutoff point. So talk to your CPA about the type of business that you have, and they should be able to help you make that determination. Okay. Um, we need to keep track of sales tax, how much you've collected and how much you owe. Track our owner investments and draws. That's again how much money you've put into your business and how much you've taken out, including inventory for personal use. So let's say, you go out and you bought, 10 skeins of Red Heart boutique yarn, and your initial reaction was you were going to make something from that and sell it. And then you decide 2 or 3 months down the road, gee, I really love that color and I want to make, a shawl, fingerless gloves, and a hat. Okay. You're then taking that inventory out of your business for personal use that you need to let your CPA know about. You got to track your income or your sales, your cost of goods sold, your expenses, and obviously your affiliate income. So that brings us down to, which do I choose? Spreadsheets or software? Now, obviously the choice is yours. But I caution you, your bookkeeping system must be flexible, meaning that you'll continue to use it as your business grows because it can grow with you and it will provide you with all the information that you need with the least amount of data entry and time. Now, time is our precious commodity. Okay. My personal preference is bookkeeping software. I use QuickBooks Premier Desktop for all of my own bookkeeping. And let's do, this really brief comparison. Um, on this slide are screenshots of the exact same report. Each report tracks sales tax, how much money or how much product you sold, how much sales tax you collected, and how much sales tax you owe. The one on the left side is done using Excel, and it takes hours to keep it updated. while the one on the right is from QuickBooks, and it's automatically updated each time you record the sale of an item with an invoice. Okay. So, you know, we're talking hours versus, a couple clicks of a button to get the exact same report. Now, there's a lot of choices out there, but remember this. If you use a non-bookkeeping system, such as spreadsheets, for your bookkeeping, you're going to spend way more time keeping your books straight. Investigate the possibilities and choose wisely. Feel free to, come into the group and ask me what I think about program X, Y, or Z. Okay. So while we're looking at reports, the next thing we're going to talk about is thing number 8. Some common business and bookkeeping transactions that you'll need to record. Now, there's going to be a ton of transactions that you need to record as your handmade business grows. And like it or not, you're going to have to learn how to perform basic bookkeeping functions. Now, due to time constraints for this webinar, I can't show you all of the transactions that you'll need to record, but I can show you a couple of pretty important ones and compare how you do the entries using Excel and QuickBooks. So the first one we're going to look at is recording owner contributions and draws. Now, while both of them, the contribution and the draw, end up in the same account, each of them has to be tracked separately, okay? Now, again, the owner contribution, it's money that you put into your business out of your own pocket, and it absolutely should never be recorded as income. When you use Excel, you're going to need to touch at a minimum of 2 different spreadsheets. One spreadsheet that acts as your check register, and another spreadsheet that you use in order to track owner investments and draws. So on the top left, we have the check register spreadsheet. Owner contributions go into your checking as a deposit or an increase, and owner draws come out as a withdrawal or a decrease. On the bottom left, we have our owner contributions and draws spreadsheet. Now, again, you're entering the same data, okay, but in 2 different spreadsheets. Here, owner contributions go in as a deposit or an increase, while owner draws come out as a withdrawal or a decrease. Now, on the right-hand side, we have QuickBooks, okay? In QuickBooks, you have accounts, and you go into your checking account and you make one entry, and it updates both your checking and your owner investment and draws account. Okay. Now, if I had QuickBooks open, I would just go straight into my checking account, enter the amount as a deposit. Okay. And I would reference my owner contribution and draws account. I can't tell you how much easier and less time consuming it is. So next, we'll look at recording the purchase of an asset. So asset purchases need to be tracked separately for tax purposes and should never be recorded as a direct expense. Again, assets are those big ticket purchases. They cost more than that certain dollar value. And that's because they have what the IRS terms is a useful life that could be several years. And when you have that asset, your CPA is going to depreciate the value of that asset every year via a special calculation and a depreciation expense amount. Okay, now that's again, that's something that your CPA does at the end of the year, but he has to know what you've purchased and what you've paid for it. Okay, so excuse me. So if you're using Excel, again, you're going to have to touch at least two different spreadsheets. One that acts as your checking account and the other that will keep track of the assets that you purchase. So on the top left, we have the check register spreadsheet. Asset purchases go in as payments or withdrawals. And then on the bottom left, um, you're also going to have to record that same information in the assets purchases tab. Okay. Now let's look at QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, we go, you go into your check register, you pull up a window that looks like literally a check. Okay. You put in the dollar amount that you spent on that asset. And down in that expenses tab, you reference that furniture and equipment or asset account. Okay. And just put a memo in as to what it was that you bought. Save it. Boom. Both accounts are updated at the click of a button. So, number 9, business reports. Okay. Business reports are the backbone of all your financial data. And I say this as a bookkeeper, business reports are a must. Okay. Um, and they're not just used at tax time, even though that's when most small business owners think about business reports and think that they're important. If you think of item number 3, if going back in this webinar, the things you have to track to prove you're a professional business. There I gave you a list of 11 things that you need to keep track of, and each of those things require a report of some form. As a business owner, you should be looking at and analyzing these reports on a monthly basis so that you know right off the get-go if you are making or losing money. So for tax time, you're going to need at least a profit and loss report that covers the entire year, showing income and expenses, okay, or what you've made and what you've spent. You're also going to need a balance sheet showing your assets, liabilities, and equity. So business reports are big, okay? Throughout you're going to, at tax time, you're also going to need an inventory report, okay, that just shows the value of the items that you have on hand, whether it's materials or finished goods that are ready to be sold. Now stop and think about how time consuming this would be in Excel. Okay. Throughout the year, you'll need to track sales tax you've collected and need to pay. Now, that's another report. You'll also need to keep track of your time. And when I say that, I mean all of the time you spend working on in your business, not just the amount of time that you spent making an individual item. So, bottom line on reports, they're really big, a must, but it's up to you as to how much time it takes you to prepare these reports. Okay. So, thing number 10, finding a good tax professional. Okay. Let's just say, it's tax time, and the burning question is, do you do your own taxes or hire a professional? Okay, let me ask you this. Would you try to replace the engine in your car by yourself? or would you take it to a reputable garage? Okay, tax returns really are just like replacing that engine because tax returns requires specialized knowledge, and it's knowledge that most of us simply don't have. So, in my opinion, you should really seek professional help when it's tax time. Now, this is especially true with all of the tax law changes that came into effect for the 2018 income tax return laws. Okay. Um, Call a local CPA, interview them. Okay. You need to make sure that they understand handmade businesses. This isn't something that you should put off till the last minute either. Um, and if you use accounting software, make sure that they know how to use the program that you have. Otherwise, you're going to be spending hours running reports for them. And boy, let me tell you, there is nothing that gets under my skin other than that. Um, you know, so if you were to choose QuickBooks, um, ask them, do you know how to do a quick report? Do you know how to run a P&L? Do you know how to drill down on the transactions that make up a certain dollar amount? Um, some of them are going to get really huffy, but you know what? That's okay too, because so many tax preparers are going to say to you, "Oh, I can use anything." And you might sit back and say, "Oh, well, that's good. That means, that they know how to use my software." No, it doesn't. It just means they know how to ask you for a bazillion reports that you have to run and give to them and basically prove all over again, where your money went. So, thank you very much. This concludes our introductory webinar. So, you want to start a handmade business, 10 things every handmade business owner should know. I'd really like to thank you for joining me and putting up with the tech issues that I had last week. And I realized today was a real last minute reschedule, but I'm getting ready to leave on vacation. And really, it was either today or not until the end of August. And I certainly didn't want to leave you hanging that long. Please visit yarnybookkeeper.com and subscribe to my weekly newsletters for business tips. You'll receive a couple of sign up bonuses when you do. And you'll also be notified when the full 10-week course is available this fall. So now I'm going to hop over to the YouTube live page, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But I also want to say, check your email tomorrow for detailed information about the full webinar this fall. And now on to the questions. Let me just go stop my screen share. Okay, here I am. Let me just reload this Facebook Live page so I can see questions. So Sarah wants to know, do cats count? They do keep me company. Absolutely. I have a cat. I also have an 85-pound boxer. And every time I bring a new skein of yarn downstairs, the boxer feels that he needs to sniff it. Okay. The cat always wants to help, but he's really not a very good knitter or crocheter. He's a really good knot tyer, though, and he's also a really good unwinder. Yeah, unwinder. Um, so, Sarah, I'm really glad that the translation of accounting speak helped. Um, I'm going to be honest with you. Even though I have an associate's degree in accounting, and even though I've been a bookkeeper for way more years than I even some days want to admit, it's well over 30. I deal with people every day who are not accountants. In the software business, I deal with businesses in the construction industry. Um, Very few of them understand um, all of that accounting speak. And because I deal with them, when I have to deal with a CPA, I stumble and fuss with my words. And actually, the CPA that I told you about, he would get so frustrated with me because he'd say, I need blah, 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 blah. And I'd say, okay, hold on a second. That translates to a QuickBooks such and such report. And he was like, well, you're supposed to be a bookkeeper. You're supposed to be blah, blah, blah. How come you don't know these terms? And one phone conversation, I got really irate with him and said, I don't deal with CPAs 365 days a year. I deal with small business owners. And as such, I have changed my terminology. And you know what? You ought to too. Um, he was not happy. Sarah says her cats are pretty good with yarn. One likes crochet hooks and double pointed needles, though. Oh boy. Um, any other questions? Anything else that you would like to see included in this introductory webinar? I will tell you this fall where each one of those 10 things is going to be its own 1 hour webinar. We are going to dive a lot deeper, and hopefully by this fall, there will be some more information on sales tax. I know right now there's, people are kind of going, yeah, Janice shared in the group that, when she first heard the news, it was like, oh my God, my handmade business is dead before I even get it started. And here I've spent so much money getting it off the ground. That's one of those lows. Okay. Um, but like I said, nobody should panic. Um, not, all the details aren't out there yet. And I read an article that was published by the CEO of Etsy. And in it, he indicated that, even one of the Supreme Court justices said, micro businesses, which is kind of what we all fall into because we are a business of one. We wear all of those hats. We wouldn't have, it would deter us from, starting that handmade business if we had to track every penny in sales tax to every state. And that's true. And then of course, there's always the good old fallback. You only sell within your state. Um, and I mean, yes, the money wouldn't be as good if we sold on Etsy or if we sold on Ravelry. And it's not going to work for everybody. I know, Sarah, because you're a pattern designer. Your patterns sell potentially everywhere, not only continental US, but, you're in Canada. You're going to be selling to people in Canada, people in the US. You could be selling to Europe. Whereas, you know, Janice as a yarn dyer, she could choose to sell her yarn only locally and not off her website. I could choose to sell my handmade items only locally and not sell them off my website and turn the website for fanciful things more into a, I don't know, a pattern review site, where I talk about things I've made and, talk about the pattern and, you know, um, just stuff like that. Um, but the thing is, we shouldn't all just panic at this point. And Janice says it's not going to happen. So good. And Sarah says, yes, it definitely makes things interesting selling digital products globally. Um, so, if you think of something that you'd like included in this webinar, please feel free to shoot me a email, Nancy@yarnybookkeeper.com, or come discuss it in the group on Facebook called Bookkeeping for Your Handmade Business. It is a closed group, and you will have to answer questions to get in. But I'm not overly stringent. I just didn't want a lot of spammers and scammers in there. Um, so if that's it, I want to thank you for joining me and have a great rest of your Monday. Bye, guys. And I am going to stop this. Um, hmm. Well, that's weird. It says I'm off air.